In the next episode of the Saga of the Volsungs, Sigurd re-encounters Brynhild a second time, but this time not in her burning ring of fire, but living in almost knightly or chivalric splendor with her brother-in-law Heimir. Here, Sigurd will stay for a while showing off the treasure that he's won from Fofnir, and then seemingly meets Brynhild all over again. There's almost no explanation of why he should just forget her, except that perhaps what's happened here is that the saga writer had two versions of how Sigurd met Brynhild, or a Valkyrie anyway, and decided to incorporate both the one where he meets her in the Ring of Fire and the one where he sort of courts her like a medieval knight. Possibly, of course, the Valkyrie, as I mentioned in the last video, was originally a different person from Brynhild, Sigurdriva, but of course is not required to produce variants of the story. There could have already been just two versions of how Sigurd meets Brynhild. So the second time, he's out hunting, he's falconing, and his falcon happens to land on the window of a tower. He climbs up to see what's inside. Well, he climbs up to get the falcon, and he looks inside, and he sees Brynhild weaving inside. He falls in love at first sight, and he goes to talk to her, and once again she gives him some advice, including that he shouldn't trust women. And then they promise that they will marry one another. This is where one of the most famous love quotes in Old Norse literature comes from. This is where Sigurd says to Brynhild, "Exferthes við Guðin, at ek skal þig eiga eða enga konu ella." I swear this before the gods that I will have you or no woman otherwise. That could also be read as or no wife otherwise, because woman and wife are the same word in Old Norse, just as man and husband are. Well, nonetheless, Sigurd will ride away yet again, and this time he rides to the kingdom of King Giuki. Here he becomes fast friends and blood brothers with Giuki's sons Gunnar and Hogni. Giuki also has another son named Guttorm, who is still a child. Gunnar and Hogni and Sigurd ride around and have fantastic adventures, the saga says, conquering different kingdoms and winning treasure. And eventually, Giuki and his wife Grimhild, who is a witch, of course, with a name like that, decide that it would be wonderful if Sigurd, who's always talking about this other woman, this Brynhild, were instead to marry into their family so they could always have this wonderful warrior around. And so Grimhild mixes up some kind of magic potion that makes Sigurd forget Brynhild. And once he's drunk that, Giuki offers Sigurd his daughter Gudrun as his wife. Now this is unusual, this is a special honor because typically a man is supposed to go in court and ask for the hand of someone's daughter. For her to actually just be offered is a tremendous honor that really speaks to the esteem in which they hold Sigurd. So Sigurd is married to Gudrun. The marriage is a happy one. They have a son named Sigmund after Sigurd's father. But eventually, Gunnar, the oldest son of Giuki, begins to feel the lack of a wife himself, and someone proposes that he go and seek the hand of Brynhild. Well, Brynhild lives inside the Ring of Fire and or inside the castle of Heimir, so they go and ask Heimir his permission to court her. Heimir seems okay with this. He's apparently the male relative who has authority over Brynhild in this case, because her father is apparently dead. And then they ride to where her Ring of Fire is, where she's apparently gone back to or something, and using a magic potion given to them by Grimhild, Sigurd and Gunnar switch appearances so that Sigurd looks like Gunnar. This is because Gunnar tries to ride through the Ring of Fire, but his horse, of course it's the horse's fault, right? Goti won't ride through the flames. Then Gunnar gets on the back of Grani, Sigurd's horse, but Grani won't ride through the flames with anybody but Sigurd on his back. Of course, this sounds like a fish story Gunnar would tell about why he didn't do it, but at any rate, Sigurd then takes the magic potion to look like Gunnar, rides through the Ring of Fire again, and wins Brynhild's promise to marry Gunnar, because of course she's promised to marry the man who rides through the Ring of Fire. Why she doesn't even bring up Sigurd when Gunnar rides through, who knows. So later, Brynhild is married to Gunnar, and this marriage also lasts and works pretty well for a while. Till sometime later, Brynhild and Gudrun, Sigurd's wife, are both out in the river bleaching their hair. And Brynhild goes upstream of Gudrun and continues to position herself upstream, even as Gudrun repositions herself, so that the dreck, the dye, or whatever they're using, washes off onto Gudrun. And Gudrun says, well, why are you doing this? I don't feel like I'm any less of a noble than you. And Brynhild says, well, yes, you are, because it's my husband, Gunnar, who dared to ride through the ring of fire. Again, Brynhild seems to have somehow taken a potion of forgetfulness herself, or there's multiple versions of the story being combined. At any rate, at this juncture, Brynhild says, no, it was Gunnar who rode through the ring of fire. Gudrun says, well, your information is wrong. It was Sigurd who rode through the fire in Gunnar's disguise, and it was Sigurd who was therefore your first lover. Strange thing to brag about, maybe, when you're someone's wife, but whatever. And then Gudrun points out a ring that was taken off of Brynhild by Sigurd disguised as Gunnar, when he rode through the ring of fire. Brynhild realizes this happened, that this is now on Gudrun's hand, so it was actually her ring, and she becomes furious, and she decides that she must cause the death of Sigurd. She can't have him, nobody can. After all, she swore an oath that she would only marry the man who knew no fear. That man is not Gunnar, the man she's actually married to, so she needs to kill Sigurd because he's married to somebody else. So she tries to convince Gunnar to kill Sigurd, that Gunnar won't do it because he's blood brothers with Sigurd. This would be like killing his own brother, which there's nothing worse than that in Norse society. So then Brynhild and Gunnar try to convince Hogni, but of course Hogni is also blood brothers with Sigurd, and unlike Gunnar, doesn't care for Brynhild and doesn't think that they need to be doing her dirty work. Nonetheless, Gunnar does eventually hit on a solution. They have a kid brother, at least teenage brother, Guttorm, who was too young to swear blood brotherhood with Sigurd. So they have Grimhild make him a magic potion made of wolf parts and snake parts to make him ferocious enough to dare to attack the great hero Sigurd. Notice there's kind of a theme in Norse literature of things being too young to swear an oath and then being the ones to break the oath of peace. So, for instance, this happens in the death of Baldur, where Mistletoe, which was too young to swear the oath not to harm Baldur, is what later is used to kill Baldur. So Guttorm goes into Sigurd's room, and initially, as he's rushing at Sigurd with his weapon, he's turned away. He's too frightened of Sigurd, who apparently sleeps with his eyes open, and his eyes have a snake-like ferocity. Guttorm runs out, but he runs back in a second time, is again deterred by the frightening sight of Sigurd's eyes. But then a third time, he runs in and stabs Sigurd through the heart into his battress. Sigurd awakes and throws his sword Gram after Guttorm, cutting him in half as he runs out of the room. But Sigurd is dying. Gudrun wakes up in her husband's blood, and Sigurd says, it's not that bad. You've still got our son Sigmund, and your brothers are still alive. But of course, Gudrun is not comforted by this, and she screams in her horror and her anguish, and this resounds throughout the town. But then Brynhild laughs even louder when she hears Gudrun, and this echoes even louder. There are also multiple different versions of how Sigurd dies. Another poem, the Poetic Edda, beside the one this is based on, states that he was killed out while hunting. There's another tradition that he was killed on the way to some kind of assembly with Gunnar and Hogni. According to the German tradition in the Nibelungenlied, it's actually the equivalent of Hogni, Hagen, who kills Sigurd, whereas Hogni is the one who doesn't want to in the Norse tradition. So there's a lot of different variations, but this is how it happens in the Saga of the Volsungs. Well, now there is Sigurd's funeral. Brynhild, for some reason, is put in charge of this, and she has Sigurd burned on a pyre that contains at least half the treasure from Fofnir. Notice how this treasure seems to get bigger and bigger and bigger. It started out as just enough to cover an otter's body. Now half of it is enough to make a huge funeral pyre for Sigurd. She also has some of his dogs sacrificed to go with him, some horses sacrificed, his falcons sacrificed to go with him, and then male and female slaves sacrificed to go with him into the afterlife. In a funeral that is not very typical of Norse society, from what we can tell, but has a lot in common with the funeral of, again, Balder, another innocent, beloved figure who was killed mercilessly by the forces of evil, and also with the funeral that Ibn Fadlan records witnessing among the Rus in Eastern Europe. And during the funeral, Brynhild also has Sigurd's son Sigmund, who's 3 years old at the time, murdered to go with him into the afterlife. And then Brynhild stands up on the funeral pyre as everything is starting to burn. She stabs herself through with Sigurd's sword Gram, and she prophesies to Gunnar and Gudrun basically exactly what's going to happen for the rest of their lives. She now dies. In the Poetic Edda, there's a poem called Helreið Brynhildar, Brynhild's Hell Ride, in which she actually is seen in the afterlife riding to hell, and the wagon that she has all this stuff burned in on top of the pyre of gold. And I always imagine what it must be like when she finally gets into hell and meets Sigurd there. You know, oh hey Sigurd, now we can be together forever, and I brought your son. But the saga doesn't record that exact moment. Well, now that Sigurd is dead, Gudrun is in mourning. One of the poems in the Poetic Edda about this, Gudrunar Kvidda 1, the first poem of Gudrun, records in really gripping terms the way that she is so struck, so sorrowful that she cannot even weep. And then different kinswomen of hers come to her and try to comfort her by telling her, you know, how awful their own sufferings have been, how much worse they've been through. And of course, this doesn't help her weep. This doesn't help her at all. And I think this is an interesting psychological observation. This is what a lot of people do when somebody else is going through loss. They say, oh, well, you know, I've lost worse. And finally, the only thing that can make her weep is when another one of her kinswomen instructs her to just sweep away the burial clothes and kiss his body. Of course, this is before he's burned. But that scene is not in the Saga of the Volsungs. That's in a poem in the Poetic Edda about this. All right, well, Gudrun goes to Denmark, where she spends some years in recovery. Grani goes with her. Grani survives the wanton sacrifice of Brynhild. But eventually, Gudrun's mother, Grimhild, decides that Gudrun's not very much used to them sitting around Denmark mourning for Sigurd. So she goes to her with Gunnar and Hogni and gives her yet another potion of forgetfulness, and then marries her off to Atli, brother of Brynhild, who is king of the Huns. Atli is the Norse version of the name Attila, which is actually the Gothic name of the historical Hunnish leader. We don't know his name in Hunnish because we don't basically know any Hunnish. Attila in Gothic means little daddy, and that's actually about right. Atta is like daddy, an affectionate word for dad, not the formal word for dad, and then the illa part is a diminutive, like ito in Spanish, so it's like daddycito or something. It's little daddy. It's sort of an affectionate diminutive term. And anyway, so Gudrun is married to him. Atli in the Norse tradition, Attila is his distant historical basis. And in the next video, I'll pick up with the story of Gudrun's marriage to Atli, which does not go well. For now, I hope that this has perhaps intrigued you to check out my translation of the Saga of the Volsungs, which appears with its medieval sequel, the Saga of Ragnar Lothbrok, in my newest book. And I am, as usual, from beautiful Colorado, wishing you all the best.